He leaned across my daughter's casket, close enough that I could smell the cologne she used to buy him for Christmas, and whispered, "You should start thinking about where you're going to live, old woman. That house is mine now." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought, not for long. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I am 63 years old. I raised my daughter alone on a teacher's salary in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I know what it looks like when a man is performing grief instead of feeling it. My son-in-law stood at that funeral with his hand on the small of another woman's back for exactly 4 seconds before he remembered where he was. I counted. My daughter's name was Noelle. She was 38 years old. She had her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and the laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants just to see who was making that sound. She built a financial planning firm from nothing, started at her kitchen table with a laptop and a list of 12 clients she'd pulled from her previous job. By the time she died, the firm managed just over $9 million in assets. She had 41 clients, 6 employees, and a husband who, I later learned, had been draining her business accounts for 2 years. His name is Preston. Preston Holloway. And I want you to understand something about Preston before I tell you the rest. He was charming in the specific way that certain men are charming, the way that makes you feel chosen when they smile at you. He'd grown up in Charlotte, gone to Wake Forest on a partial scholarship, got his MBA, worked in commercial real estate. When Noelle brought him home 6 years ago, I served him sweet potato pie and watched him compliment everything in my house: the curtains, the framed photos, the ceramic rooster I've had on my kitchen counter since 1987. He was, I thought, a good man. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. Noelle had called me 11 days before she died. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because I had just gotten in from my book club, and I was still wearing my good shoes when the phone rang. She sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard since the early years of the business. She said, "Mama, I need to go through some things with you. Not right now, this weekend. Can I come down Saturday?" I said, of course. I asked if she was all right. She said, "I will be." She never made it to Saturday. On Thursday morning, she had what the initial report called a cardiac event while driving on I-40. Her car drifted into the shoulder and came to a stop against the guardrail. The paramedics said she was gone before anyone reached her. She was 38 years old with no known heart condition, no family history, no warning signs. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as hypertensive heart disease. I buried her on a grey Saturday in March, and at the graveside, in front of 40 people who had loved my daughter, Preston leaned over and told me to start thinking about where I was going to live. I pressed my funeral program flat against my thigh, and I said very quietly, "Thank you for letting me know." He straightened up, nodded, put his sunglasses back on, even though there was no sun. I drove home alone. I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours, and then I opened my laptop and I started writing down everything I could remember. The week after the funeral, Preston's behavior moved fast. He had the locks changed on Noelle's house, the house she'd bought herself before they married, the house that was in her name, within 9 days. He told me through a text message, not a phone call. A text. He wrote that he'd be in touch about her personal belongings and that he appreciated my patience during this difficult time. I showed that text to my neighbor, Gwen. Gwen is 71 and spent 22 years as a paralegal before she retired. She read it twice and looked at me over her glasses and said, "Marvella, you need an attorney." I said I knew that. She said, "Not just any attorney, an estate attorney who handles contested wills." That was the first time the word contested wills. That was the first time the word contested entered my mind in connection with my daughter's death. And once it was there, I couldn't unfind it. I had spent the 2 weeks since the funeral in a kind of managed fog, making myself eat, making myself sleep, answering the phone when my sister called from Richmond. But underneath all of it, something had been nagging at me that I hadn't let myself look at directly. Nell had called me 11 days before she died and said she needed to talk. She'd sounded tired and careful. She'd said "I will be," not "I'm fine," and she had never made it to Saturday. I drove to the library. Not because I didn't have internet at home, but because I needed to be somewhere with other people around me while I did what I was about to do. I spent 4 hours reading about warfarin toxicity. Warfarin is a blood thinner. In the right dose, it prevents clots. In wrong doses, or in someone who doesn't know they're taking it, it causes bleeding, internal bleeding. It can trigger cardiac events in people with no prior history. It's odorless, tasteless. It can be introduced into food or drink without detection, and unless a medical examiner is specifically testing for anticoagulant toxicity, it won't show up in a standard autopsy. I wrote all of that down in a spiral notebook I bought at the library gift shop. I bought 2 of them. Then I went home and I called Noelle's best friend, a woman named Sonia who had been her college roommate, and remained the kind of friend who knows the things that family doesn't. I asked Sonia if she could come to dinner. She came that Friday. I made the roast chicken Noelle always asked for when she visited, and Sonia and I sat at my kitchen table, and I let her cry for a while before I asked her what I needed to ask. I said, "Sonia, did Noelle ever tell you she was scared of Preston?" Sonia was quiet for a long time. She turned her wineglass slowly between both hands. She said, "She told me about 4 months ago that she'd found a discrepancy in the business accounts, a transfer she hadn't authorized. She said Preston had access to the operating accounts because she'd added him when she had her gallbladder surgery 2 years ago, in case anything happened. She said she confronted him and he had an explanation and she wanted to believe it. I asked if she believed it. Sonia said, no, and I don't think Noelle did either. She told me she was going to have her accountant do a full audit. She said she was going to ask Preston to have his name removed from the accounts. I said, when did she say this? Sonia said, about 2 weeks before she died. I went to find an attorney the following Monday. Her name is not important, but she is sharp and careful, and she charged me $400 for the first hour, and I have never spent money more gratefully in my life. I showed her what I had, the timeline of calls, Sonia's account, the text from Preston about the locks, the fact that Preston, as Noel's husband, was the primary beneficiary on her life insurance policy, $1.2 million, and stood to inherit the business under the terms of a will that Noel had drafted 3 years into the marriage, before, her attorney confirmed, she had discovered the account discrepancy. My attorney listened to all of it. Then she said, I want to flag something. If your daughter was going to ask for an audit and remove her husband's account access, that is a significant financial and legal threat to him. And if there is any possibility that her death was not natural, then we are in very different territory. She referred me to a private investigator named Howard. Howard is a former Guilford County Sheriff's deputy, small and methodical, and he looked at everything I showed him and said very little. He said he would make some calls. What Howard found over the next 3 weeks changed everything. He started with Preston's finances. Preston had not worked in 14 months. He had told Noelle, and apparently everyone else, that he was transitioning between firms. What he was actually doing was servicing a gambling debt he had accumulated over 2 years at a casino in Cherokee, North Carolina, about 2 hours west of Greensboro. The debt, at its peak, was approximately $340,000. He had been paying it down using transfers from Noelle's business operating account, 11 transfers over 22 months, totaling $287,000. Then Howard found the woman. Her name doesn't matter either. What matters is that she lived in an apartment in Winston-Salem that Preston had been paying for since the previous spring, and that she worked at the same casino where Preston had accumulated his debt. Howard found receipts. He found a credit card in Preston's name used for groceries, utilities, and 2 weekend trips, one to Asheville, one to Myrtle Beach, while Noel was at home working 60-hour weeks to keep her business solvent. I sat with all of that for one night. Just one night. Because I had to let myself feel what it meant, that my daughter had been funding the life of the man who was betraying her, that she had likely known or suspected something was wrong, that she had called me and said I will be, and then gotten in her car on a Thursday morning and never come home. The next morning I called Howard back. I told him I wanted to know about the medication. Howard said he had already been thinking about it. He had a contact at the medical examiner's office. Not to interfere with anything, but to ask a quiet question. The question was whether Noella's toxicology screen had included a test for anticoagulant compounds. The answer was no. The standard panel had been run. Warfarin and similar compounds require a specific, separate test that is not part of a routine cardiac autopsy in North Carolina unless there is a reason to request it. There was now a reason. Howard's contact could not order the test, but my attorney could file a motion to have the case reviewed by the state medical examiner's office based on new evidence related to financial motive and potential foul play. She filed that motion on a Thursday. The review was granted the following month. While we waited, I did something that I have thought about many times since, because it required me to do something I had never done in 63 years of life. I lied to my son-in-law's face. Preston had reached out politely this time by phone to arrange a time for me to collect Noelle's personal items from the house. I agreed. I asked if I could come the following Sunday afternoon. He said yes. I arrived with my sister and 2 large boxes. Preston was there briefly but left after about 45 minutes to meet someone for lunch. He showed me to the bedroom, told me to take what was Noelle's and left. I moved quickly. Noelle had always kept a small fire safe in the back of her closet, behind her winter coats. It had been there since before she married Preston. She'd used it for her passport, her social security card, and, because she was her mother's daughter, a written record of anything she considered important. The safe was still there. It was locked, but Noelle had given me the combination years ago on a small piece of paper tucked into the zippered pocket of my winter coat, which I had never removed because I am the kind of person who does not remove things from zippered pockets. Inside the safe, I found her passport, her social security card, a printed copy of her business insurance policy, and a brown envelope with my name written on it in her handwriting. I put it in my purse. I did not open it until I was in my car, 3 blocks from her house. Inside the envelope was a 4-page, handwritten letter and a USB drive. In the letter, Noelle told me everything. She had been documenting Preston's transfers for 6 months. She had hired her own accountant, not the firm's regular accountant, a separate one, privately, to trace every transaction. The accountant had confirmed that $287,000 had left the business accounts in unauthorized transfers, all linked to Preston. She had also found the apartment in Winston-Salem. She had not confronted Preston a second time because she was afraid of what he might do. She wrote, "I am going to see an attorney next week. I'm going to see you on Saturday. I want someone to know the full picture before I take any steps because I want to be careful." She had been careful. She had done everything right. She had written it all down and sealed it in an envelope with my name on it and put it somewhere she trusted I would find. The USB drive contained screenshots, bank statements, the accountant's preliminary report, receipts, photographs from Preston's phone that Noelle had accessed through their shared cloud account, including images of him with the woman from Winston-Salem, time-stamped and geotagged. I drove home with that envelope in my lap. I called my attorney from my driveway. I said, "I need you to come to my house today." She came. She photographed every page of the letter. She copied the USB drive. She held it all and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Marvella, this is everything." The state medical examiner's review was completed 6 weeks later. The supplemental toxicology test found elevated levels of warfarin metabolites in preserved tissue samples from Noelle's autopsy. Not a therapeutic dose. Not a therapeutic dose. Not accidental exposure. The concentration was consistent with repeated low-dose administration over a period of several weeks, sufficient to compromise cardiac stability without triggering obvious symptoms. My daughter had not died of hypertensive heart disease. She had been poisoned. Preston was arrested on a Tuesday morning in May. I did not watch. I didn't need to. Gwen called me from across the street and told me the sheriff's cars were there, and I sat in my kitchen with my hands around a cup of coffee that went cold, and I said a quiet thing to Noelle, just to the air in the room, the way you do when the person you're talking to is no longer anywhere you can reach. The charges included first-degree murder, felony embezzlement, and wire fraud. The woman in Winston-Salem was not charged with the murder. Investigators found no evidence she had known, but she cooperated fully with the prosecution. The business accounts were frozen pending a civil recovery action brought by Noelle's estate. Howard's documentation of the $287,000 in transfers was entered into the court record. Noelle's original will was contested by her estate on the grounds of undue influence and fraud. The probate court agreed. A prior will, executed before her marriage, left everything to a charitable fund for first-generation college students in Guilford County, something Noelle had cared about since she was the first person in our family to finish a 4-year degree. Preston Holloway was convicted 14 months after my daughter's funeral. He received life without the possibility of parole. I was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I did not celebrate. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. There was no great wave of relief, no lightness. What I felt was something quieter and harder to name. Something like the end of a long and terrible responsibility. Something like setting down a weight I had been carrying since a Thursday morning in March, when my phone rang and a stranger's voice told me my daughter was gone. I cleaned out my closet the weekend after the trial. I found, in the zippered pocket of my winter coat, a second small piece of paper I had forgotten about, a note in Noelle's handwriting from years ago, a grocery list, left there by accident and never removed. Apples, bread, the good coffee, not the cheap stuff. I stood in my hallway for a long time holding that piece of paper. She was meticulous. She was careful. She left me everything I needed to find in the place she knew I would look because she knew her mother. She trusted me to do what she could not finish doing herself. I did, baby. I hope I made you proud. The thing nobody tells you about grief is that it can sharpen you. I didn't expect that. I expected to fall apart, and for a little while I did. I sat in my kitchen, I stared at walls, I let the coffee go cold. But somewhere underneath all of that, something in me stayed very still and very clear. And I have thought a lot about why. Preston counted on me being soft with sorrow. He changed those locks 9 days after we buried my daughter because he believed that a 63-year-old retired schoolteacher from Greensboro would fold. He had looked at me my whole life the way certain people look at women like me and decided there was nothing to worry about. That assumption was the first thing he got wrong. It was also the thing that undid him. What I did over those months was not heroic. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do anything that required courage so much as it required paying attention, writing things down, asking careful questions, sitting in a library for 4 hours reading things I didn't want to know. Noelle had taught me something without meaning to, that the most dangerous thing you can do when someone underestimates you is prove them right by giving up. She hadn't given up. She had documented everything. She had sealed an envelope with my name on it and put it somewhere she trusted I would look. She had done all of that while afraid, while being stolen from, while still going to work every morning and managing her clients' money with the same care she always had. That is not a small thing. That is a person of enormous character operating under unbearable pressure, and I will spend the rest of my life being proud of her for it. I have thought a lot about what it takes to do what Noelle did, and what it took for me to finish what she started. It comes down to 3 things that I don't think you can separate from each other. The first is doing right even when it would be easier not to. Noelle could have looked the other way. She could have told herself the transfers were a misunderstanding, that she was imagining things, that the marriage was worth protecting at any cost. She didn't. She chose honesty over comfort, and that choice, made quietly and at great personal risk, was the foundation of everything that came after. The second is thinking clearly, not panicking, not reacting, but slowing down and being methodical. Howard didn't solve this. My attorney didn't solve this. The envelope in the closet solved this because my daughter had the presence of mind to organize her evidence and protect it long before anyone knew to look for it. And the third is simply refusing to stop. There were moments when I could have stopped. When the medical examiner's report said cardiac event, and I could have let that be the end of the story. When Preston changed the locks, and I could have decided it wasn't worth the fight. I didn't stop because Noelle hadn't stopped. That felt like the only way I knew how to honor her. Preston is serving life without parole. The money, what could be recovered, went to the people Noelle had always meant to help. And the house that he told me was his is no longer relevant to anyone's life. What I know now is this. The people who do harm count on the rest of us being too tired, too sad, or too afraid to look closely. They count on grief making us small. My daughter refused to be small, and in the end, so did I.